There are many things that define the success of a series, but the most important element that can make or break a story is the final arc. After all, our memory is most influenced by our final impression with something, whether that be a person or a story. Since beginning this adventure down the masterful story of Bleach, I've heard murmurs of the final arc of this series, whispers of its greatness, the magnitude this arc possesses, the immortalization of Bleach. Everything up until this point has led us here. We are finally to the last arc of the story, the legendary 1,000-year Blood War. We'll be splitting this arc into 4 parts because my good friend Sailor provided me with the chapters corresponding to logical stopping points, so after each section I complete, I'll be making a video on the corresponding chapters. If you're new to this series, we cover Bleach from a completely blind perspective of never having read the manga or seen the anime. And since starting this journey, I've fallen in love with this dark story, and by the end of this final arc, it may just go down as my favorite story of all time. So if you haven't already, please drop a subscription in celebration of us finally making it to this monumental moment, because I now present to you our blind review of Bleach's 1,000-year Blood War. The 1,000-year Blood War arc starts in fast-paced fashion with us witnessing a dialogue with the Research and Development Unit about a mass disappearance of hollows, and that at the rate it's currently going, within a few days the barrier between the worlds would cease to exist. That this is none other than the work of a certain party, because only one group is capable of removing hollows completely from existence. Immediately I knew from literally the first chapter of this arc who the enemy would be. The Quincy. Due to the title of this arc, it's apparent that this surrounds a long-lasting conflict, and it makes perfect sense for it to surround the Quincy's. After all, accepting the notion that they were simply extinct, minus Uryu and Ryukin, it never sat well with me. We're immediately taken to 2 new Soul Reapers to be stationed in Karakura Town, Shino and Yuki. Once they arrive, they're immediately brutalized by a large number of hollows until Uryu, Chad, Orihime, and Ichigo arrive, which mirrors a scene that appeared in the trailer for this arc. However, all things aren't sunshine and rainbows with their arrival. We witness someone watching from a distance. This individual arrives in the following days to Ichigo's room after Shino and Yuki recovered, and he prompts Ichigo to fight, and we learn that his name is Ebern, who had a clear Arrancar mask and a white uniform. While Ichigo fights this new foe, we see a Quincy cross which confirmed the suspicion we already had regarding the villains of this arc, and he continually presses Ichigo to unleash his Bankai, and immediately I found this suspicious. After all, who would want to fight Ichigo at full strength? Ichigo, not seeing a potential trap in front of him, does just that. He unleashes his Bankai, and for a second I was terrified of what could possibly happen. We see Ebern attempt to steal Ichigo's Bankai through a device, but thankfully it doesn't work, which shocks him, but more so than that, it made me realize the horrors to come. Despite Ichigo not having his Bankai stolen, that fate wouldn't be the same for the rest of Soul Society. At the point of writing this, I have mere speculation for the reason his Bankai couldn't be stolen, perhaps due to him not being a full Shinigami, or the fact that he has a hollow within him, but again, I'm unsure. And during this battle, Ichigo wins, but there isn't much victory to follow afterwards. When I say this arc moves fast, I mean it. Simultaneously to Ichigo's fight, we're exposed to Ikkaku investigating missing people in the Rukanki district, but most importantly, a group of white-clad individuals arrived to Yamamoto's office to declare war. Yamamoto has always been a character I thoroughly loved, but he solidifies himself during this video to be one of the greatest characters of this story. In response to the question regarding the security of his office, he says there's no need for security, that he is there. There is no better security. It's rare we see a panel that has Yamamoto's face full of quiet wrath, and my god, it is terrifying. The fight doesn't break out here, however, rather it is merely the declaration of war along the barely alive body of Yamamoto's best friend and right hand within Sasakib. That within 5 days Soul Society would be eliminated at the hands of the Wanderreich, which is the first mention of the name of the central villain group. Kubo has thematic naming schemes, and it appears this group follows all German names, which is quite fitting. The enemy is organized, uniform, and they all follow a leader with a mustache. Quite the coincidence, right? Before the Wanderreich depart, Yamamoto has told through Sasakib that they have the ability to erase a Shinigami's Bankai, which is a terrifying concept. However, Sasakib wasn't fully correct. We learned that it is the power to steal another's Bankai, which far trumps the potentiality of erasing it or sealing it away. Abilities like this with an anime really stress me out because I hate to see characters lose their coolest power, and where I'm at now currently in my reading, there is still no fix for their bankais being stolen, but I pray to the Soul King that they find a way to do so. Sasaki previously wasn't a fully fleshed out character prior to this arc, but we learned through dialogue of his unwavering loyalty to Yamamoto, that he denied the captain position countless times, and in conflict he never used his bankai despite possessing one. This was all due to him choosing to be Yamamoto's lieutenant, Yamamoto's shadow, as long as they both live. This depth we're given through just a few chapters is paramount. It gives the emotional weight needed for us to have a glimpse into understanding Yamamoto's immense emotional pain, with him losing his best friend and his greatest ally. Once more, Kubo proves how great he is at storytelling because he can deliver such intimate connections in such a short time. With the Wonder Reich arriving back to their headquarters, it immediately struck me as an ominous and dark place, aged white walls all covered in ice, and as the Wonder Reich approaches the throne, we see a large man with long hair and a mustache who looks very similar to Old Man Zangetsu minus his glasses, sitting on a throne. Despite cutting off part of the body of his subordinate, he states conflict doesn't please him. Fairly contradictory, I'd say, and he goes on to further threaten those below him with violence and mutilation. There is this continual dichotomy of peace and destruction that he preaches, and in committing violence he does so in an apparent name of justice and peace, which leads me to believe he views his actions as righteous. To further that concept, everyone refers to him as Your Majesty, and he has a fitting aura for that. He seems to have a god complex, which seems to be an antagonist theme Kubo enjoys using, and it sure as hell works. Aizen and now the Mustache Man, both are god-tier individuals. Ichigo is eventually second-hand informed on the information regarding the declaration of war, and as he ponders on this information, to my delight, Nell arrives. I had been wondering where the hell Nell has been for ages, and lo and behold, our little friend arrives back into the story. Although, with ominous news. Hueco Mundo has been taken over, and we see a panel of Halle Bell chained up as she became the leader of Hueco Mundo after the previous conflicts, and now seems to be enslaved by the Quincy. Not only that, but old Dondachaka has been taken, and his name, I still find it funny, even though he's obviously kidnapped, his name always makes me giggle. As a result, our favorite humans unquestionably hear this, and they decide to go save Dondachaka with the assistance of Urahara. Urahara points out that all these events taking place surely aren't coincidence. After all, it seems all the chess pieces are set into play. Hueco Mundo was taken over, a declaration of war, a scout sent to attack Ichigo, then the kidnapping of Dondachaka, which would likely lead to Ichigo going after him. It all seems too laid out to be merely typical war games. With our group arriving to Hueco Mundo, we see the General Hunt Commander Opie, who goes through a brutal recruiting process with the captured Hollows in a Roncar, and of the group who chose to fight rather than submit is none other than Lolly and Manoli. I genuinely wasn't expecting to ever see them again in the story, but here the hell they are, but not just them, also Halle Bell's 3 Fracciones. I personally thought they died, but it was good to see them again. While they fight versus Opie, I found it notable the different fighting style these Quincy possess outside of what we were initially exposed to. Uryu had stated that a Quincy's weapon is a bow, but that seems to be incorrect. There seems to be a lot more fighting styles than that, including swords. My only knock on the original Quincy design was that they used bows, so seeing them being far more versatile than that made their design for me far more appealing, to be honest. Our 3 Fracciones that are brought back into the story are sadly unable to defeat Opie. In fact, he brutally won, but Opie's opponent now becomes Ichigo. With this news being reported to the leader of the Quincy, he declares war to mobilize the troops, particularly the Sternritter, who seem to be the highest ranked Quincy warriors, to now begin the invasion and bring Soul Society to its knees. In their dialogue, they state that Ichigo is one of the 5 notable threats, which is why it's a perfect time to strike. This leads me to speculate the potential 5 threats. Obviously, it stated Ichigo is 1. I imagine the other 4 are Yamamoto, Kimpachi, Urahara, and Aizen, despite him being locked up. I'm likely wrong on this, but I really enjoyed putting these speculations out before we discover the truth, so we can look back on them and see whether I was right or wrong. Thankfully, in the captain's meeting at the same time, Yamamoto also declared to prepare for battle at any moment because the 5-day timeline they gave was likely a ruse. Once more, this fast-paced story now begins a war just a handful of chapters into the arc. Mayuri and Yamamoto have a really notable conversation regarding Mayuri's responsibility for the missing people within Rukangi District, and Mayuri tells Yamamoto that the responsibility for what is taking place is Yamamoto's alone, for failing 1,000 years ago to eliminate a certain man, that being the mustached Quincy god. Ichigo's fight with Opie continues, and during it Uryu comes up, and Opie seems to know quite a lot about Uryu, implying that his own power pales in comparison to Uryu. Once more, I felt a ton of foreshadowing that Uryu is some legendary Quincy without any of us or even him fully knowing. My favorite ability OP used during the fight was Quincy Letzel, which I undoubtedly pronounced wrong, but is translated to Quincy Complete. We saw Uryu do this in Soul Society, in which they take off their glove and absorb all the spirit energy around them while in combat. However, in the case of these high-ranked Quincy's, they don't lose their power forever after using it. OP even gains this really light spirit energy armor, which looks absolutely incredible. The design of the Quincy's is lighter color, and they have a very godlike demeanor and view the Shinigami as lesser than creatures. Soul Reapers design-wise are in direct contrast with the darker tones and elements to their design, which is an interesting juxtaposition. Light versus dark, which typically translates to good versus evil, which at first would be a flip scenario in this story with our Shinigami being the good guys. However, as Shunzui once said, in war there is no good or evil. It's merely war. The invasion takes place during Ichigo's fight, and as the invasion is about to commence, we're reminded of the stark difference within Quincy and Shinigami and why they stand at direct opposition to each other ideologically. This is an important reminder that Kubo puts back into the story, because at the time it had been so many years since that concept was introduced in the first arc of the story, and I'm sure many readers likely had a blurred memory of it. Story time quickly ends with beams of light coming throughout the Seireitei, with the Quincy leader stating how conflict is always such a bitter affair. An absolute chilling scene with a look of horror upon so many soldiers. This arc is brutal, and I have to remind myself that the majority of all soldiers within the Godier 13 aren't some warmongering, highly powerful individuals. Rather, they're low-ranking soldiers without much power who work and go home to their families. In this war, Kubo does a great job reflecting the slaughter of the low-ranking soldiers. In the previous arcs, the main action was towards the captains and lieutenants, yet here he shows how war truly is. Brutal, unrelenting, and without mercy. With the war beginning, we see Yamamoto observing the Pillars of Light, and he tells his third seat to watch and protect the palace, that he had to go. Despite reading what we're about to discuss so many times over already, I still get chills thinking of what's to come. With the invasion now beginning, so does the slaughter. Beginning with Izuru, who had been a previously fairly important character throughout the entire story, yet he's killed here almost immediately. We see the Sternritter arrive with orders to leave no survivors. With the slaughter we're shown, it led me to awaiting the captains to fight, and I didn't have to wait long at all. The captains all fight almost immediately. Through this story, the captains have served as a bastion of hope, and I expected them to turn the tides of this invasion, but boy was I wrong. It begins with Rinji and Byakuya fighting side by side, captain and lieutenant. Byakuya reinforces the idea of the treachery these individuals possess. They seek to annihilate all of Soul Society without hesitation. They are enemies in the truest sense. After a speech like that, I thought surely Rinji and Byakuya would be able to hold their own. Despite knowing that the enemy can seal Bankais, Byakuya knowingly chooses to use his, and he tells Rinji to observe how they can counter this and observe the method they can take away Bankais with. What I thought was masterful with Kubo's writing was that during this scene, this conversation isn't Byakuya and Rinji's alone, but the exact words are echoed through conversation of captain and lieutenant across the battlefield. Komamura, Toshiro, Soifon, and Byakuya all used their Bankai, and this scene felt parallel to when Aizen stopped Ichigo's theme music. The captains now realize that they don't seal Bankais, they steal them. Immediately this information is relayed across the Seireitei, and it's pretty masterful with who Kubo chooses to use their Bankais. Of the individuals who used them, we had previously seen their Bankais at full power, so it ensures that when the unseen Bankais of individuals like Shunzui or Unohana are revealed, it'll be in epic fashion. Speaking of Shunzui, when facing his opponent he gets his eye cut, which confirms the observation I had from the trailer for the next season. The Seireitei is under extreme chaos and destruction, and Akon seeing this chooses to call Ichigo to help stop this bloodshed. He eventually gets in contact with Ichigo after speaking to Urahara, and Opie is defeated. Thus, Ichigo heads towards Soul Society and is informed on the information of the enemy from Urahara and Akon. They have 3 abilities. Quincy Complete, which we saw before, which far exceeds Uryu as it doesn't result in their Quincy powers being lost. Then there's Blute, which manipulates energy to increase offensive or defensive capabilities, however Quincy's can't do this all at once. And lastly, the Bankai Appropriation, simply stealing Bankais. Quite ridiculous abilities if you ask me, but hey, I'm all for busted villains. Urahara stands to reason that the enemy they fear the most is Ichigo, which is why he needs to be on the battlefield. However, as he heads towards Soul Society and we're teased with him saving it, he is imprisoned through a Quincy ability from Opie who wasn't completely dead. This was brutalizing as a reader and for Ichigo. Ichigo can hear the cries of Soul Society and the hope they have with him coming, yet he's unable to do anything. He's unable to protect. a theme that time and time again comes full surface to Ichigo. With Opie still alive, he stands against Unohana, but is killed by an unknown foe with an aura of blue energy. At first I thought it was Uryu, until I see Unohana shocked and full of dread along with a sword. This quickly made me realize it wasn't Uryu, but I began to speculate who it could be. Through process of elimination, it's not any of the Soul Reapers as their allies, and given they're in Wako Mundo and the individual had a Zanpakuto, it led me to believe it was one of the remaining Espada who didn't have a confirmed death. Due to the color of the aura and Unohana's shock, I came to the theory that it's Grimmjow. However, where I'm at, I'm still completely unsure. Despite Opie's defeat, the prison remains intact, which is integral for what is to come and for Ichigo's development. Rinji and Byakuya's fight continues, and we see Sternritter F's ability, which at first seemed to be poison, but rather she inflicts true fear upon her enemies. Something she believed Byakuya hasn't felt in a long time. In a beautiful dialogue, Byakuya states that he never suppressed his fear, he used it as a part of battle, but the speech is cut short with the true nature of fear within her ability. That fear that comes from reason is kind, but fear without reason is not an emotion, but an instinct, and she uses this to defeat Byakuya in battle by his own Bankai. Byakuya, who I believe to be one of the strongest captains, is defeated with ease by one of the Sternritter, at the hands of his own power. These Sternritters are monsters and seem to be even above captain level. Along with Byakuya, Rinji and Rukia are also seriously injured, and I found myself feeling hopeless for a cast of characters. As y'all know, Rukia is my favorite character of the series, and I'm just itching for the day she becomes powerful enough to absolutely decimate the foe who stands before her. Perhaps it's wishful thinking on my end, but hey, I'm all for her getting a Bankai. In a moment I had awaited, someone who could be a bastion of hope. We see a captain I believe stands above the rest finally arrive. Kenpachi Zaraki, and he arrives with dead Sternritters on his shoulder to face none other than the leader of the Quincy. Given how strong Sternritters are shown to be, it made me feel like Kenpachi could stand toe-to-toe with the leader and we see them clash swords. However, we don't see the battle. While this battle happens off-screen, we see Ichigo scream out within his prison saying that he won't let them die, that he'll protect them, and we see an aura around him that mirrors the Fullbring light, and I can't imagine the pain Ichigo feels being so close to protecting others, yet unable to do so. The battles continue and the other man we've awaited finally appears, Yamamoto, and the foe he faces uses his best friend's Bankai on Yamamoto, which ensures in the flashback for Sasaki. It shows how they met and even how Yamamoto got one of the scars on his head. It was from Sasaki's Bankai, which he learned in order to serve under Yamamoto. His undying loyalty and admiration of Yamamoto was beyond heartfelt, and it made their bond something you could viscerally feel. Yamamoto takes the brunt of his best friend's stolen Bankai, and in rage calls out to his dead companion that he can feel his anger and his rage, that his Bankai was far greater than this mockery, and he cuts and burns the Sternritter in half. This ensues one of my favorite fights of the series thus far. Seeing Yamamoto, a typically more stoic individual, full of emotion, full of rage, it's visceral, it's carnal. He says that he'll strike down every invader with his own hand, and we can finally see the god of destruction he is at full power. With his aura, it can be felt around the Seirete, which compels all the captains to fight stronger and not give up. They know that a monster is unleashed, and he can't outshine them. His aura is so goddamn strong that it's literally felt. People are literally burning up and getting chapped lips because of his sheer presence. Yamamoto is the embodiment of a leader, a captain, the protector of Soul Society. We're taken back to the foe Yamamoto was unable to kill 1,000 years ago, and we see Kenpachi defeated and half alive, barely being held up. Kenpachi, the man who seemed unbeatable, now hangs limply. Yamamoto then arrives in an aura of fire, and we learn the Quincy's name finally, Yuha. I know there's not much of a consensus around how his name is pronounced. In the video games it seems to be pronounced Yuha, so we'll go with that, but my god, it is the wrong time to get stuck on linguistics. Two gods are about to start fighting. For the sake of my sanity, let's call him Yuha for short, or if I'm feeling generous, I'll say Yuha, but please forgive me if that's not how you say it personally. I guess we'll have to wait for the actual sub and dub to come out. As their leader is met by Yamamoto, the Sternritters scoff at the notion and all jump at once to attack him. Yet, they don't realize that Yamamoto is on a level of his own, and he burns them to a crisp immediately. Yuha draws his blade, and upon doing so, Yamamoto is delighted. He says that he awaited him to do so that he could shatter his blade, his soul, his flesh, all from the very core. In such an amazing panel, we see all the flames subside, and Yamamoto unleashes his Bankai. His Bankai turns his blade into a charred sword. He seals all of the flames he has into the blade, and as a result, anything the blade touches ceases to exist. It's burned up into ash. We see Unohana in a brief panel stating that she hopes he makes this battle quick, otherwise Soul Society will burn up from his sheer power. The godlike status of Yamamoto is incredible. While Yuha and Yamamoto clash, Yuha states that his Bankai seems to have changed from when they previously fought 1,000 years ago, which made me have some suspicions that Yamamoto never fully unleashed his true power up until now. With his Bankai, it has numerous directions with all different powers. His Zankan no Tachi West cloaks him in the aura of the heat of the sun itself, which is how Yuha's blade was shattered during his attempted strike. A Bankai with 4 cardinal directions, all with different powers. My god, this ability is unreal. Now cloaked in flames scorching the very earth, he fights against Yuha's desperate attempts to combat Yamamoto. Throughout this fight, I continually felt the power of this captain, his unbeatable nature, and this made me worry. Yuha, the leader of the Quincy, is being pushed to the brink without much pushing back himself. Yamamoto then uses his Zankan no Tachi South, and he summons the dead of those he's killed by his own blade. And at this point, I think this may have become my favorite Bankai. With 4 different abilities for simply one Bankai, and he can literally summon the dead like a necromancer. Absolutely unreal. I can't even verbally describe how much I was geeking out during this fight. I literally couldn't stop reading. The dead he summons pile up around Yuha, and the dead that were surrounded are none other than some of the Sternritters who served underneath him. With Yuha seeming to be on the brink of extinction, Yamamoto tells him that he knows why he didn't steal his Bankai. It's because he couldn't, and he speculates that the only way you can steal someone's Bankai is with full knowledge of their power, and he tells Yuha that even 1,000 years ago he never fully revealed his power up until now, and he uses his Zankan no Tachi North to cut Yuha in half. And as he lays there with life going out of his lungs, he apologizes. Immediately, I had to reread this panel. Yuha, who solidified himself as having an immense god complex with no fear and a sense of righteousness, now apologizes. I began to fear for reading the next chapter. The next chapter starts off with showing 2 twins born with a unique power. One the ability to imitate appearance, power, and skills, the other one with the ability to imitate appearance, memories, and mind. I then knew what was coming. Yamamoto began to realize the same thing I did, that him apologizing didn't make any sense, and eventually behind Yamamoto arrives a beam of light and the real Yuha arrives. Holy shit, I started seeing death flags everywhere. Yuha informs us he went to go speak to Ishin and he tried to recruit him, but he refused. Ishin's refusal made sense to me. He doesn't value the Quincy's inherently, but most importantly, Ishin has a god complex and would never be subservient to another. I wish they had released Ishin from prison during this invasion, because he may have been the best shot they had at winning. Yamamoto unleashes his Bankai as a final effort to now fight once more, but his Bankai is stolen. His Bankai could only be stolen by someone as powerful as Yuha, and in a chilling scene that will forever scar me, Yuha summons a sword of blue energy and he cuts Yamamoto in half. We see a flashback of Shunzui as a kid in Yamamoto's living quarters, and a conversation begins regarding a picture on the wall of Yamamoto's Bankai, even though his face is unseen. Yamamoto tells Shunzui that if the man in the picture were to ever appear again, that it would be the last day he's ever seen, and my heart broke. Yamamoto's life comes to a close. Shunzui has always struck me as the closest captain to Yamamoto in terms of relationship, and this drove home that point, which makes what's to come regarding Shunzui all the more fitting. Yamamoto's death was brutal and so graphic, and when the anime comes I hope none of it is censored. Yamamoto is mutilated, and Yuha's words to him are chilling. That Yamamoto became weak, that the original Godier 13 were monsters and were rightfully feared, but now they were weak because they sought justice and peace, that the original Godier 13 died 1,000 years ago with his defeat. Yuha, both in actions and words, has quickly become a godly antagonist, and unlike Ishin, who I fanboy over, I truly have disdain towards Yuha. The invasion then escalates until the arrival of Ichigo upon the battlefield finally takes place. Upon Ichigo's arrival, he doesn't first go to fight. Instead, he goes to Byakuya, and symbolically this is phenomenal. Previously, they stood against each other ideologically and they were enemies, yet now they meet as comrades. Byakuya, who embodies pride, he asks a mere human a final request as he feels his life barely hanging by. He asks Ichigo to protect Soul Society. With rain pouring down and tears from Byakuya, we see Ichigo's face with the shadow cast over it, full of emotion, pain, rage, primordial wrath. Before Yuha is able to leave, Ichigo arrives before him, carrying not just the weight of his emotions, but the request of Byakuya, the fate of the Soul Society, and he asks if this is the man responsible for doing this. And upon Yuha's answer, Ichigo erupts into spirit energy and he fights against him. Despite Ichigo's immense power, he's overwhelmed, but instead of being killed by Yuha, Yuha requests to bring him to the castle and be added into their forces. This immediately made me begin to question everything there is about Ichigo. Why would the enemy believe he's worthy of joining forces? I don't have much time to think on it though, because Ichigo, despite seeming lifeless, he isn't, and Yuha realizes that Ichigo is using Blut Vene, which is the Quincy ability we saw previously. At this point, I had to reread the page several times. Ichigo is using a Quincy power. Yuha begins to discuss that he shouldn't have used a Quincy to thwart his arrival, because as a result, the memories of Ichigo's spirit energy have now awakened. Given Ishin is a Shinigami, it led to the only logical conclusion in my head that his mother was likely a Quincy. And it's affirmed literally moments later by Yuha saying that Ichigo doesn't know anything about himself or his mother. This adds so much depth to the further mystery behind Ichigo's mother's death, and as well, it gives me the impression her death wasn't simply by the Grand Fisher. There's likely far more at play here. Before Yuha can capture Ichigo, we see a shadow-like aura around Yuha as he apparently reaches his time limit within the Serite, but he didn't know that the time limit was about to approach, which is due to Ishin somehow throwing off his senses. I have no idea how Ishin did this, but it foreshadows that we'll be seeing Ishin in combat once more before the story is over, and my god, I can't wait. Yuha tells Ichigo before he leaves a line that says, "My precious son born in the dark," and I took this completely metaphorically. Yuha, who seems to be the father of all Quincy's, calls Ichigo his son due to his heritage, the fact that he's part Quincy. Although it's not confirmed where I'm at right now, I believe now we know why Ichigo's Bankai couldn't be stolen. It's due to his hybrid nature. We then see the aftermath of Soul Society's destruction. The grief that so many feel is visceral, including Isane's and Unohana's, due to them being told to stay in their squad building. They had to sit idly by and wait for the wounded and dead to come to them. Thankfully from the battle, Rukia and Rinji survive, and Rukia speaks to Ichigo briefly, and she recounts after he leaves that something seemed wrong with him, something outside of the grief they're all feeling. Rukia knows Ichigo almost better than anyone, and she isn't remotely wrong. He is now full of questions about himself as a whole. He is a child born into the darkness. We see the captains meet and we see grief depicted in so many ways. Soifon lashes out and is brash, Komomura tries his best to hold it all in, and Shunsui puts all his grief inside and chooses to lead. He informs them how Yamamoto would act if he saw them now, and he reminds them of the purpose of the Gote 13. The purpose is to protect Soul Society. This moment solidifies Shunsui's upcoming appointment in the following chapters to head as the Captain Commander. He was closest to Yamamoto, and despite being someone depicted often as lazy, when they are left without a leader, he steps up to fill the vacant shoes of his former father figure. Ichigo is sent to meet with Mayuri about his broken Zanpakuto, and Mayuri informs us that once a Zanpakuto is broken in its Bankai phase, that it can never be restored to its original form. I feel in every anime and manga with swordsmen, they go through a path to restore their broken blade, and Bleach is no different. I love many arcs like this, and especially in the case for Ichigo, whose relation to his sword is something I continually want to see more of. Squad Zero eventually arrives at the Serite, and it wasn't what I was expecting at all. Squad Zero consists of 5 members whose power is said to exceed the entire 13 Court Guard squads, and despite that hype, their appearance was not what I remotely expected. Typically, Kubo designs beautiful characters, and I'm not saying these individuals are ugly, but they're sure a lot more homely than the captains were accustomed to. Not just that, they don't carry a demeanor of seriousness. In fact, they're super lackadaisical, but we can see brief glimpses of the monsters they are with how much confidence and regality they tote. Of the Squad Zero members, we had only heard the name of one previously within the flashback to the Visored and Urahara, that being Hikafune, who was a mother figure to Hiyori. All the squad members have previous relationships to some of the captains, likely due to the captains serving underneath them at some point. The captains who we are shown to have previous relationships with the Squad Zero members, it gives us a better glimpse into the timeline and the hierarchy of the various individuals within the 13 Court Guard squads. Notably, the noviceness that Soifon shows in her understanding of the Godier 13 and Squad Zero reminds us that she's been in the captain position a short time comparatively to the rest. We learn that the Squad Zero members came down to the Serite to take a few individuals, those being Ichigo, Rukia, Rinji, and Byakuya. Before they head back to the Royal Palace, however, a conversation takes place with Tenjiro and Unohana. Tenjiro tells Unohana that she knows what she should be doing and is not healing the others. This quick but ominous dialogue sets into place some startling events to come in the upcoming chapters. As Squad Zero and Ichigo and the rest leave, a broadcast from Urahara appears and he informs everyone that he, Chad, and Orihime are safe. Yet someone in the background arrives and causes a ruckus, and although we can't see his face, based on him calling Ichigo a bastard and getting upset at hearing his name, it really drove home the point to me that is likely Grimmjow. Unohana, before turning off the transmission, tells Ichigo to act on behalf of himself and not to think of others. This is contradictory to Ichigo's entire personality, and Unohana knows that. When Ichigo acts on behalf of himself, he thereby acts on behalf of others. I imagine Unohana told him this to clear his mind, because right now Ichigo has the weight of the world on his shoulders. They eventually depart through one of the original waifus of the series, Kukaku Shiba, who I was unsure if we'd ever see again, and as they fly up to the royal palace through her device, another mysterious line is said. She said that they have to let him do this even if their uncle ends up shedding tears as a result. Once more, I started my mental gymnastics. Who could this uncle be, and why has he never been mentioned? Then I remember that at first glance Ukitake thought Ichigo was Cayenne Shiba, who was Kukaku's brother, and as I went down this rabbit hole, I thought to myself and came to the conclusion that Ishin is likely the uncle in question, which adds even more mystery to Ichigo's heritage. Another odd moment is that we see some of the Fullbringers with Kukaku, and although we don't see their face, I sure as hell recognize them when I see them. It seems like it won't just be Shinigami versus Quincy, but perhaps the Fullbringers will aid on the side of the Shinigami as well. Within the royal palace, we learn that the Oken is in fact the bones of Squad Zero, which is actually a really unique concept. We then learn the structure of the royal palace and that each of the Squad Zero members have their own individual town. Ichigo goes from town to town, beginning with Tenjiro where he bathes in a hot spring to restore his body, which is a technique our crafty Unohana stole from him. Rinji awakens during this time and is healed up and sent alongside Ichigo to the next town. In the next town they're with Hikifune, who feeds them and uses her food to restore their spirit energy. Watching her go from overweight to a perfect body and absolutely beautiful after cooking surprised Ichigo, Rinji, and myself, and she teaches us that each Squad Zero member embodies some of the history of Soul Society. She created the Gigongon, and the next man they train under, Yumiya, is the creator of the Zanpakuto. Despite him creating the Zanpakuto, his personality was hyper extroverted and he seemed obsessed with partying and women. This juxtaposition was amazing because he went from a scary individual and someone I imagined to be super serious given his swordsmanship to one I feel like I could grab a drink with. Although Yumiya isn't all fun and games, he takes them into a house and they fall into a hole, and he tells them that the reason their Zanpakuto broke is their own fault. That if they can make it out of this place alive, he would consider reforging their blades. Asachi appear and they're dark and formless entities that Yumiya says are the ultimate Zanpakuto. In fact, they're the form of what a Zanpakuto begins as. He informs us the history of the Zanpakuto and that initially they're formless, but after spending day and night with it, the wielder of the blade's souls are imprinted upon it and they form uniquely to the individual. These Asachi or Asoichi, I'm not sure how to say it to be honest, seem to be the base souls that meld to the wielder of them, and now Rinji and Ichigo fight versus them. As Yumiya says, they're in fact quite angry at them. They use their Zanpakuto all wrong, and although off-screen, Ichigo and Rinji then fight versus them for 72 hours. During this, Shunzui, now as the head captain, appears before the Central 46, and he informs them that his first action will be to teach Kimpachi the way of the sword. When he said this, I immediately was taken aback. All this time, in his eyes, Kimpachi never knew how to even wield his blade? My god, a scene then shocked me. The one to teach him the blade is Captain Unohana. The first Kimpachi, Unohana Yachiro. This literally blew my mind. There had been subtle hints this entire story of Unohana being a sleeping monster through very brief moments, but never did I expect for her to be the very first Kimpachi. When Yuha told Yamamoto that the Godier 13 died long ago, we see a brief panel of Yamamoto and the rest of the original 13 Court Guard squads, although they're blurred. One did look notably like Unohana, and my god, it truly was. What's even more troublesome with this shock is that Unohana's name is Unohana Yachiro. Yachiro the same name as Kimpachi's lieutenant. The plot then thickens. Unohana and Kimpachi arrive to an underground location called Muken, a place where they wouldn't need to hold back. Kimpachi and Unohana's conversation immediately struck me as having a lot more history than meets the eye, that both of them are criminals. We see a chilling face from Unohana, and she tells him that he's powerless. Another giant twist happens. Unohana and Kimpachi both reveal that the only scars on their body that they've kept all this time are the ones from each other. Holy hell, Unohana, Unomami, she was the mother figure of the entire 13 Court Guard squads. But as Kimpachi informs us, she was the most infamous villain of Soul Society, a master swordsman. She knew all parts of the blade and she gave herself the name Yachiro, which literally means countless styles or countless flows. It suddenly dawned on me that this wasn't a typical training match. This was a fight to the death. Unohana versus Zaraki. Only one would make it out. In a time like this when they're preparing for another invasion, I didn't expect for them to have to kill each other, but I soon learned just why this needed to happen. A heartbreaking scene we're shown a glimpse of was Isane and Yachiro both emotional knowing what was about to transpire. Unohana left a note to her lieutenant, her last words, and at this point I knew who would come out alive. Their fight was brutal, gruesome, and unnerving. Unohana fights with almost no emotion, she fights with guile. She time and time again pushes Kimpachi to the brink of losing his life and continually informs him that he got weaker. Zaraki tells her how she was his idol, that when they first fought, that was the first time he felt the true thrill of battle. Every other thing before that was meaningless, it was numb. As Zaraki gets his throat punctured, he continually loses consciousness, and Unohana monologues to herself that each time he faces death, he gets stronger. From my interpretation of this, each time he's about to die, or in fact dies during this battle, she heals him and allows him to get stronger, over and over again, continually growing closer to his initial form, his true power. This element within storytelling and manga has happened a few times, death enabling one to restore themselves to their true state, and every time it's used, it's phenomenal. Through a flashback we witnessed the first time he ever sealed his power. As a child long ago, he unconsciously sealed this power while fighting her. What amazes the hell out of me is that as a child, he was stronger than Unohana. That's ridiculous to say out loud. It also makes Kimpachi losing to Ichigo back in the Soul Society arc not a retcon. Rather, his power was just sealed in order to still enjoy fighting. Otherwise, he'd be stronger than anyone and everything would feel numb. As the fight draws closer to a close, Unohana reveals her Bankai, and instead of something I'd initially imagined as a healing Bankai, it's a blade of blood that melts apart Zaraki and her skin as they fight. As the fight continues full of gore and guts, Zaraki finally awakes. He remembers everything. The fading in and out of consciousness is finally over. He's fully present for these moments that he's longed for. Unohana and Kimpachi relish in this battle. Every moment of combat they indulge in. Kimpachi versus Kimpachi. Their love of battle is displayed in every aspect of their nature. Unohana literally learned healing to fight more and take more damage, to enjoy battle forever. Kenpachi sealed away his power in order to enjoy fighting forever. Both are two sides of the same coin. But Unohana realizes what she's always needed to do. Everything is led up till this point. There can be only one true Kimpachi. It's destiny. When two powerful foes exist and find another with true strength, their blade becomes infused with a purpose. To kill the other or allow one to grow stronger. The blade of Unohana has its purpose. To raise up the chosen one, the chosen Kimpachi, and to enable this, Unohana dies, and as she dies with no fear or pain, she says that the only man to ever bring her pleasure in her life was Kimpachi Zaraki. With final words like that, she broke hearts around all of Soul Society and mine included, and by the end of this fight, I was sweating reading it. We've lost a captain, but in losing Unohana, we awaken to the man we need to face off versus the Quincy. Kenpachi has another foe worthy of his true power, that being Yuha. Unohana gave everything she had, everything she learned to Kimpachi, all her strength, and now as Zaraki awakened, something else awakens, or should I say someone else. We see his name being called out in the darkness, saying that they've been by his side longer than anyone, and then we see his blade. Given the panel prior is of him and Yachiro, it seems his blade has been manifested through Yachiro this entire time. Through the only brief flashbacks we have of Kimpachi within Soul Society, Yachiro was the person who was with him the longest, and he's always remembered her being there. I'm unsure how it works with Yachiro taking the form of a young girl, but it sure as hell is incredible with the foreshadowing we see throughout the story. Perhaps now Kimpachi finally has the ability to use his Bankai. I can't get over how incredible this fight was. Truly two of the greatest fights in all the series in one video, so imagine my dismay in choosing who will be in the thumbnail. It's definitely one of the hardest decisions I've had to make for our blind reviews. Can we take a moment as well to appreciate how Kimpachi and Unohana kept the secret of their history under wraps for so long? It seems the only person who knew them truly were Shunzui and Yamamoto. This fight had me reading through it over and over again, and despite how fantastic this fight was, a part of me does wish we could have seen a longer flashback before Unohana's death of her as the greatest criminal in Soul Society. Hell, I love Unohana and I would have loved to see her around a longer time in the story to fight versus one of the Stern Ritter. Alas, her sacrifice won't be in vain. She's awakened the true god of war that is Kimpachi Zaraki. We're then shown back to Ichigo and Rinji's training, and Ichigo is bloodied and on the ground, yet Rinji is up front and fine. Namaya says that the Asoichi didn't choose Ichigo, that he should give up, that it's time to return home and to never set foot in Soul Society again. This frustrated me because how the hell could Rinji do fine with this test, but not our protagonist Ichigo? But as Ichigo is banished away, Namaya states that Ichigo has no idea what it means that the Asoichi didn't choose him. that he's been fighting for himself all this time without even being able to wield one, that he needs to learn who he truly is and where he came from. So many questions arose to my mind. How the hell does Ichigo not know how to use an Asoichi? His Tensei Zangetsu is a Zanpakuto, which would by default be created from an Asoichi. Also, the notion that he's been fighting by himself is silly because we've seen his Zangetsu time and time again, but simultaneously, Namaya's statement implies Ichigo's room to grow is even stronger and in fact rather infinite. Perhaps due to his mixed heritage he's unable to be chosen, or maybe there's even more to his true nature. Thus enacts the perfect transition to lead us to the Everything But the Rain flashback. This flashback is amazing. Within 10 chapters, the questions we had regarding who Ichigo truly is, they're answered masterfully through showing us how Ishin and Masaki came to meet each other. On paper, the concept seemed simple, but there is so much more to the circumstances regarding their encounter that it genuinely blew my mind. The flashback begins once Ichigo returns to the human world, and while at his boss's house, he encounters his dad who tells him that the time to finally learn about who he truly is now here. As a side note, I was unsure if we'd ever see Ichigo's boss with an Ikumi again, and I'm delighted we did. She acts as an older sister for Ichigo in a really heartfelt scene describing the role of adults in helping lost individuals like Ichigo. While this took place, we see Namaya talk to Rinji regarding Asoichi, that every Zanpakuto he's ever created he's kept track of, and the process of transforming an Asoichi into a Zanpakuto is invariable. Regardless of the power of the user, whether it be soldier, lieutenant, or captain, everyone must go through the same circumstances with their sword. This was fascinating to ponder on. We've seen two entities exist within Ichigo's blade, but perhaps none of them are true Zanpakuto spirits. It seems rather one is a Quincy and one is a hollow. This leads perfectly to what we are soon to learn. As Ishin takes us to the past, we're first met with the banter of Rangiku and himself, and we learn that Ishin was a former captain of the 10th Division. We also learn Ishin's true last name is Shiba, and we were correct about our theory earlier. It's cool that Ichigo also pulled a Naruto in taking his mother's last name, and my god, I love being correct on theories. And to my delight, Toshiro was also within the squad as a third seat. It made me immediately have some questions to how the heck they never realized Ishin was Ichigo's dad, given they were at his house so much, but alas. Ishin goes on a mission to the human world to investigate missing Shinigami, and in doing so, we're shown the mastermind Aizen once more. Honestly, at this point in the story, I feel essentially everything has been facilitated by Aizen and Unohana, and this flashback proves that even more. In the human world upon Ishin's arrival, we're shown the Ashida household where Masaki lived. Masaki's demeanor and love of food reminded me a lot of Orihime and Yoruichi. She's spirited and energetic, just like Ishin, which makes Ichigo's serious demeanor clearly not very genetic. Within the Ashida household, Ryuken's upbringing is demonstrated with his mother as an intense and unwavering woman focused on preserving the pure-blooded Quincy's. In fact, that's why Masaki lives with him. She's set up to be in an arranged marriage with Ryuken. By the way, it seems Ryuken is her cousin, so that's a little bit questionable. But despite Ryuken's demeanor as an adult, him as a young adult and late teen is someone who truly seems good-natured. Ishin, while in the city, finds the hollow responsible for the missing Shinigami, and he fights against it. And immediately, the design of the hollow stuck out to me. A jet black color with horns almost identical to Ichigo's hollow form. I soon learned the truth. Masaki senses the fight and she quickly comes to join the battle despite it being Soul Reaper versus Hollow. Typically, Quincy's would never assist Shinigami under any circumstance. Aizen, Kaname, and Gin, while watching this, they interfere in the battle and they harm Ishin, and they have a dialogue regarding this Hollow that was created. That its name is white, and that despite its jet black appearance, its name is indicative of its true nature. Immediately, I have realized that this is the white we see within Ichigo, but I question what it means with the white demonstrating its true nature. Perhaps its true nature is pure and wholesome, but that seems kind of contradictory to what we've seen thus far. The battle progresses and Ishin unfortunately never reveals his Bankai. My god, I wonder if we'll ever see it, but he's assisted by Masaki, who voluntarily chooses to take an attack from White in order to finish him off, and in finishing off White, White begins to explode, which Ishin absorbs to protect Masaki. Quite a romantic love origin story, right? Masaki tells Ishin her name and that she's a Quincy, yet upon hearing this, Ishin doesn't give a damn about her being a Quincy. He's entranced by her. After observing this explosion, Kaname recounts how this experiment went wrong. White used transference and spread to a Quincy and not a Shinigami as intended, but Aizen is delighted in this turn of events. He relishes in the unordinary. Ishin returns home, as does Masaki, and they both think on each other, and eventually Ishin returns to the human world just to visit her. However, things upon visiting her aren't good. Abruptly, Masaki fainted while in the Ashida household because she developed a hollow-like hole in the middle of her chest, and she seemed on the pendulum of life or death. Ishin in the human world, while searching for her, he encounters Ryukin and he sees Masaki in this state. As Ryukin is terrified for what's going on, he was trying to find someone to help her. This love triangle is fascinating, and I can't really tell if Ryukin loves her as family given they're cousins, or he loves her romantically, but regardless, he cares for her deeply. Which makes me question why Uryu and Ichigo didn't grow up as friends given their family is so intertwined, but again, I can't question these things too heavily. During this encounter, none other than Unohana arrives, and he says that he believes he can save her. However, despite being able to potentially save her, she can never return back to normal, and he informs them about holification and the concept being unintended for Quincy's. In fact, holification kills both Shinigami and Quincy due to soul suicide, but there is a way to balance the soul and have it stabilized similarly to the visored. To do so, an opposing entity is needed. For someone who is now part Quincy and hollow like Masaki, the opposite of both parts of herself is Shinigami and human. That another force would need to be linked to her the rest of her life, otherwise she would die. Unohana asks this request to Ishin that if he wants to save her, he would need to use his Gigai and stay with her the rest of her life. That he'd no longer be Shinigami. Ishin throws aside everything without question for Masaki, and he agrees to this. I had chills at this moment. He disregarded his position as a captain, as a Shinigami, his prior life, all for a woman he just met. Additionally, it shows us that there wasn't a retcon about Ishin not having power in the past. His power was suppressed intentionally to protect Masaki. What's really weird to say out loud is that it seems that Unohana and Aizen literally set up Ichigo's parents, and as a result, they're kinda responsible for Ichigo being born. That's quite ridiculous, but again, they're the masterminds of this story. Time flies by pretty fast after this, and it shows Ishin opening his clinic and falling in love with Masaki. That she was just like the sun, and he was merely in her orbit. Masaki, despite being in the story so short of a time, she won me over. She's a beautiful character and brightens up everything around her. Masaki and Ishin end up together, and Ryukin and Katagiri end up married. Despite the Ishida's family's obsession with a pure bloodline, Ryukin marries someone who has a half-blood, and I'm unsure where along the way he lost this aura he had about him when he was younger, but in this flashback, Ryukin really seemed to be a likable character and someone who is actively overcoming his upbringing. These moments of warmth are short-lived, however, as we're taken to the day Ichigo's mom died. We learn that on that day was the systematic selection of Quincy by Yuha. That according to lore, the Quincy god would recover his heartbeat over a span of 900 years, recover his intellect over 90 years, and over 9 years additionally it would take for him to regain his power. To recover his power, he stole the powers of all mixed blood Quincy's he deemed as impure, which Katagiri and now Masaki are. On that day, their powers were stricken from them, which is how Masaki was killed by the Grand Fisher. Under normal circumstances, she would have been completely unharmed, but with her powers taken, she couldn't protect herself. This led me to finally understand why Ishin wasn't angry with Grand Fisher. The true person responsible was Yuha all this time, a true godlike villain. Both our protagonists and our deuterogonists within Ichigo and Uryu, both their parents were taken by Yuha, which foreshadows an eventual duo of them facing off versus the final villain themselves, and it adds so much depth to this final villain, this final arc. This is true vengeance that now Ichigo has. With Ichigo now knowing the truth of himself, Ichigo sets off to Soul Society, now determined with a clear goal in mind, to kill Yuha. At the same time though, Uryu stands before Yuha as he's welcomed to the Quincy Palace. At this point, I truthfully didn't have any feelings that Uryu is a traitor or a spy. Rather, I think Uryu probably also now knows his true origin as well as Ichigo and the responsibility for his mother's death. I imagine this is all part of his plan to stand against Yuha side by side with his now, as we learn, distant cousin Ichigo. My god, this flashback taught us so much. Everything since the beginning has been planned out by Kubo, and it's absolutely brilliant writing by him. With the origins of Ichigo, it dawned on me as well that he's literally part Quincy, Hollow, Shinigami, Fullbringer, and human, which saying out loud is quite ridiculous. He seems to be genetically the most busted character by far within the story, and my god, I can't wait to see him at full power. This flashback as well clears up a bunch of things that possibly could have been deemed as retcons before, but in fact, it was all part of Kubo's masterful plan, and I absolutely love when mangakas clear up potential retcons by revealing that these things happen for a particular reason. Within this arc, there's still so much left for this story and so many more fights to come. This arc contains some of the most groundbreaking elements within this story and 2 god-tier fights. The 1000-Year Blood War is living up to its name and the hype surrounding this masterpiece by Kubo. What will happen next? What is the limit of Ichigo's power? What is Uryu's true plan? What are the unrevealed bankais of some of our favorite characters within this story? And lastly, what is the motivation of Yhwach? I guess we'll find out next time. If you stuck around this long, please do consider dropping a subscription, as this is literally our longest video to date, and I'm already itching to dive into the next part of the 1000-Year Blood War. Similarly to what Rukia said to Ichigo, this isn't goodbye, but see you later. As always, be greedier.